Yes, welcome you all again to this Local Network Lead workshop, looking at building the relationship between local network leads and open research enablers. So Evangeline, if you are ready, I'm happy to pass over to you to give us your talk first.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I have too many windows open, I couldn't find you. So my name's Evangeline, I am the ORCA at Reading, but I wanted to make sure that this was, it obviously reflect the experience of LNLs. So I created this alongside Anna Takalaki, who's our LNL at Reading, who can't currently be here, and also Etienne, who is here and used to be an LNL. I did have a presentation, but now I can't find it. So I'll do it off the top of my head, which is fine. So basically, when I asked Anna what was the most important thing for her in terms of time saving and making sure that everything is easy to do, she said the spreadsheet that we have. So basically, the spreadsheet we have tracks all contacts we have with everybody. So we make obvious notes like, their names and the school where they are, notes. We assign the contact going forward to either me or Anna or Etienne. Obviously for us, that's really important because we're lucky enough to have a team, and I know lots of you here don't today. So it is also really important, just for ourselves. To be honest, I look at my own lines on that spreadsheet more than Anna and Etienne's, just to make sure that every time I have a contact, I enter it into that spreadsheet and check that there's a progress, a clear action. And the other thing is just to be really optimistic. Eventually, when you manage to broaden that network in your university, it means you can link those people into that spreadsheet, and they'll have a very clear idea of what's happening. So obviously that's the easy bit, but how do we find people to enter people into that spreadsheet? The first thing that we do at Reading is to link in with other leads from related groups. So for example, at Reading, we've got a research integrity community of practice and some public engagement leads who are really obviously linked to open research. That was an easy win. There are others. So I know, for example, Anna's doing some work with the AI community of practice, which I didn't see any link to initially to open research. But what I think we've learned is that open research is really, really broad and it covers so much. So even if there's communities that you don't necessarily think are related to open research, there's a chance that they still are. And the thing is that even when you link into them, even if you decide there's actually not very much link to your situation at all, that's absolutely fine, because you still get a really good link to somebody who's a leader of a group of people, passionate about networking and championing a cause. Worst case scenario, you just get some good tips on how to kind of bring people together as a network. The other obvious benefit of that is it means you can link into other events with people who have similar goals, and either piggyback off theirs or create one together. They've also got a network of people who are interested in something that's hopefully quite similar, and if you tailor adverts and stuff to things that are specific to their interests, you've got a network of people, whether it's a Teams channel or an email list or something. They've got an established way of advertising things to them. So I know Anna specifically has found that really helpful. The next thing we do is to try and find people who are, they've got strategic input. So what you're looking for is people who already have experience in making changes to the research lifecycle, for example, RDLs or ethics committees, that kind of thing. I happen to have just finished a project on the public thank you, Etienne. The public facing documents that all the universities have. And those are a really, really good place to start, because the chances are university is doing something. And by looking at the authors or the people who are consulted in those documents, it can really help. Because I have just finished that, I did write some notes down just before that. So for example, 73% of universities have a statement or a policy on responsible research assessment. 88% have senior staff or group responsible for OR culture and practice, and 65% have a publicly available statement on open research. That's just to show that, I just wanted to mention it because it shows that it's more likely than not that your university does have something already which you can link into. Also, I have that information, and I assume that there is no issue with me giving you back your own data. So if you filled out that survey for us, thank you very much. If you didn't and have no idea what I'm talking about, do get in contact with me, and I should be able to give you that what your university has already and save you a little bit of time. And then also the other thing is that once you've made those links to people, you can sprinkle their names into emails and adverts and stuff, and it gives you a little bit more clout when you're trying to advertise. Then the last one, which I'm sure you all know, but I cannot overemphasize it enough. Shout out to, I think, Hannah, who said she's a librarian. The librarians are absolutely amazing. They are central. They get communication from all areas of the university. And also when people think about open research, when they're not particularly familiar, they think of open access. So people who, librarians tend to be the first point of call for people, and they can't always answer all of the questions because open research is so broad. So linking in with them is really great. They've got experience in delivering training. They know where there are pockets of activity and where there are not pockets of activity. So I'd really recommend getting in touch with them, which leads into the final thing that we do on the spreadsheet, which is any queries that we get, we make sure those are documented and followed up on. So that can be either through yourself when you get a little bit more known, or through librarians and other boards or anything like that. Those are really helpful, again, because they show you what questions people are asking and where the pockets of interest are and who is looking for more information on this kind of stuff. So I think that is everything that we had in Reading. Do get in contact with me if you're interested in getting that overview of what your university is currently doing. I can't promise that your university is there, but most of them were. So optimistically, we should have your information. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evangeline. We will move right along to Adam, and then we'll have a Q&A after we've heard from all of our speakers. So Adam, over to you.
Cool. So I've got 3 slides to share, which is probably still too many. Have a look.
Yep, we can see that fine.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, so I thought I would kind of outline a few things that we've done at Sheffield to try and kind of outreach into other disciplines. So this is, I think, Evangeline sort of touched on this. And at the end, I'll kind of end with my also kind of optimistic take for the future as well. Yeah, just a bit of sort of practice sharing here. So 2 sort of things that we're doing or have done is, when I first came to Sheffield, we did a kind of tour of the different departments. So our institutional lead basically put a notification out asking for different departments who would be interested in us coming to talk to them about. But at the time, it was when the new UKRI open access policy was coming in, which obviously was like a step change in how researchers would have to actually do their practice and publish. So that was the kind of hook. And then we kind of asked if they had like a regular research seminar or just some time for us to come in and talk to them primarily about that. But then also we were able to discuss the sort of wider support that's available. And kind of what you might expect is you get the kind of the usual suspects, so kind of psychology and neuroscience disciplines and the areas where this is actually well established already. But we actually kind of found the opposite. We got a lot of areas where they're using more qualitative research methods, places like urban studies and planning, and architecture and things like that, which is interesting in itself. But I think the interest from there was because they were feeling pressured from different places to share data, and they weren't sure about if they could do it or use other open research practices, and they weren't sure exactly how to do that. So that was kind of interesting as well. And we're planning on doing this again and actually reaching out into the departments we did hear from first time, which at Sheffield was engineering, faculty of engineering, and faculty of health. We only had one department from faculty of health, so we're going to be running that again. And something that I'm developing at the moment is some training for CPD for supervisors specifically around open research. And again, all institutions organise differently. How this is organised for us is that this specific session isn't mandatory, but supervisors have some mandatory time that they have to do training on, and they can their department or their faculty chooses which topics they want it on. That's how I've kind of got into delivering this. And the faculties which chose it was Faculty of Health, and I think we've got one from engineering and one like languages, which would be very interesting. But yeah, just to say how I'm kind of positioning that is more of a discussion than specifically skills kind of training. And again, to try and get them to share practice with each other as well. Because, you know, I'm not an expert in all of these methods. You know, it's possible for one person to be in all these different disciplines. So I'm primarily using that as a sort of discussion session to kind of info gathering for us as a sort of central support team to see how we can support them to embed this a bit more. Again, the supervisors have a huge influence on how actual research gets done. So I think that should be really impactful, hopefully. And yeah, positioning like that should hopefully, you know, and this is kind of an interesting topic as well, how we've kind of positioned open research support in Sheffield generally is, you know, you have sort of ethics and research integrity, which tends to be more sort of compliance focused, obviously very, very strict in a lot of cases, particularly in health. And we've kind of positioned ourselves more on the other end, so obviously not trying to root out fraud and things like that, but more trying to just raise the level and the quality of everyone's research practice. Which again, there's pros and cons of kind of how you do this, but that's how we're positioned generally. And then yeah, just to finalize, again, there's some sort of more senior people here as well, but just to say this is a systematic change. So it can feel like things are very difficult within your own institution to do this sometimes. And it is slow, but we're going with the tide rather than against it, and it should get easier with time. So the most impactful thing I think coming up is the proposed changes to the REF, making research culture more important. There's also the UK Committee on Research Integrity, which is putting out some indicators of research integrity, which some of those relate to research training as well. There's UKRN's work on incentives, which is progressing as well around hiring and promotion. And also the VTI Research and Development Framework, which is a lot of institutions use that to guide how they train their researchers. It's being revised currently to include open research as well. So the general optimism from this is that, yes, currently it can be really difficult to really break into those different departments, which have a lot of other incentives, which are not necessarily focused on this. But those tables should be turning soon, and once it gets built into the system a bit better, we should have people coming to us a bit more than us having to necessarily go out there and track people down. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Adam. We'll move right along to Joe Corneli.
So yeah, it's just I was reflecting when these folks were talking that famous essay about the two cultures, the Snow essay about two cultures of the humanities and science really should be reprised as two cultures, research and research support, who sometimes seem to think that they're so different that they can hardly even communicate with each other. I don't think so, and I've worked back and forth between those two areas myself. Granted, I came to this project as an ORCA, and now I'm trying to think about how to build the local network here. And yeah, obviously talking to Will and Deanne and Steve and others who worked in those, worked on that, it's been helpful. And so that the UKRN community is very helpful. But I think in terms of my own experience here at Brookes, by the way, do you hear me well? Yeah, okay, good. So in terms of my own experience here at Brookes, I think I've probably brought a bit of a researcher mindset to some of my engagement and activity with people. So one of the things that I've done, and I hope to replicate it again within each faculty. The first one was a workshop that I ran, which was a cross-faculty workshop, and I brought people, I had them sit in tables linked with each of their faculties. Brookes has a handful of faculties, and asked them to think about kind of where things are and where they'd like things to be with regard to open research. And that was great. So we had some research support staff coming to that meeting, and I asked them to sit with the faculties where they felt most aligned. So it was centered on researchers. But as a result of that workshop, some interviews I had also done going into the workshop, I wrote up a really nice and very succinct kind of bullet point outline using the material provided by Reading. So here they are on the call. Thank you to Reading for this guide to making an open research action plan. So coming out of the workshop, we had a bullet point outline of open research action plan, and that's gone off to an open research working group, which hopefully something will emerge from that again. But that, you know, this is kind of specifically above my pay grade because I only want senior or at least permanent members of staff on these kinds of working groups for whatever reason. But I was able to input it into it and able to synthesize a bunch of stuff from a bunch of other people who aren't on that working group. So I think that was good. And then one little piece of evidence to support that that was good is at a sort of soft launch, let's say, which took place recently for our project here. I don't quite know why, but partly aiming to recruit people into the open research training, we decided to come up with a launch type event and invited people along. We gave them sandwiches. And one of the people from the library had a copy of my 4-page report, which is very detailed highlighting and notes in the margin. So I could see that it's being read by people who've gotten their hands on it. I don't quite know where he got it from, but it's great to see that discussion is moving forward. So like I said, I would like to replicate that same workshop within each of the faculties here at Brookes to get people a little bit more comfortable in thinking, now that we have a bit more traction, how they want to see open research developing in their work. We're also doing more formal training and stuff like that. So I think we have a good amount of contact between researchers and people involved in the project. I think another aspect of it, though, that's interesting is going all these different directions. So, for example, when we're recruiting people for the training, that's been a great way to start up conversations with all kinds of people. And we found some folks in the research support office I work in, as well as a good level of interest from folks in the library, as well as interest from faculty. So one of our plans going forward is, again, to kind of pull people together where relevant. So building a kind of cohort based discussion from those people attending the training this time as a kind of panel discussion. So that will be good because then we can get feedback out of them. It's a little bit like a focus group, but also with the participation of other people who might come in and want to join the dialogue. I think the last thing I would like to add is I've tried to recruit people into that process, especially when I think it's going to create somewhat difficult, challenging questions. So, and that has been borne out. So the person I approached in the humanities and social science department said, I'm not so sure any of this stuff really applies to me or to my discipline. She works in law. And I said, that's exactly why I came to you, because, I want to have people who are coming and participating and asking, why am I here? How is this relevant to me? And creating those kinds of surface for further discussion. So hopefully that will all work. It's a little bit of a chaotic approach. And that's like I had said before, we don't actually have a local network yet. So I hope by swirling these people together, we will be able to form a network. I am a lead of another network actually about the AI thing. So it's the AI and Data Analysis Network. So we have quite good practices around that. And basically we want to copy paste those practices, at least in the first instance, for our local network when we get that going. So I think I'll pause there. That's probably enough for me.
Thank you, Joe. And that brings us, lucky last, to Steve Boneham.
I do have slides, so you'll forgive me for sharing those now, but you've heard most of the points I'm going to make already, so that makes it a little bit shorter and easier for me, I guess. Thank you to the previous speakers. Just check you're all seeing that okay? Okay, so
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of this is going to be quite obvious. I focused on the idea of promoting events, reaching into different places, different channels and different messages. Like most of you, I'm sure, we have a local network team to manage that. It is a combination of researchers and research enablers and research support and all the terms we've heard already. It's around about 60, 65 people, so not a humble brag there, but it's not massive. It's a self-selecting audience. As Joe said, it's the people who are keen on this already, not necessarily reaching out beyond that. So that is our primary channel for advertising, generic things at least. It's not necessarily the most active conversation, but we are aware there are quite a few people who we're very grateful for, who always pick on our messages and share them beyond their network. So the cascade effect, I think, is important, but that's where those people are seeing things first and passing them on. Beyond that, we are very lucky to have a dedicated researcher network, largely of postdocs, built up to think about how they progress their career within the university. And one of their themes was research practice. They invited us to our kickoff conference event to talk about open research, run a workshop, and that's continued throughout there. So that is a really nice place to go for people talking about research and careers, but there's a dedicated channel for open research. So the point about both those things is going to those established interdisciplinary networks for those messages works pretty well in terms of conversions for people saying that's where they heard about those things when they do turn up on our events. Above and beyond that, we also like to target things specifically. Certainly if it's something that perhaps is more relevant to some disciplines than others, or if we're doing it on a school by school basis, an academic unit. Perhaps surprisingly, quite old-fashioned newsletters within schools and faculties are really popular. And people say to us, oh, I didn't know about that event. It wasn't in the newsletter. But when we put them in those things, they see them. It's the kind of thing that our academics at least don't filter out. That's always in their inbox. So being in those, going to regular school meetings, just a bit of context, I'm kind of a supportive, as in a secondary local network lead, if you like. Our main colleague was in the school that you see on that slide there, an example, has now withdrawn from doing that role, so we're looking for another one. So we're having to look at other people doing it. Going to regular meetings takes a lot of time and effort. We're lucky that the library team that I'm part of help with that. If it's you on your own, that's a lot more difficult to do. But again, getting on that agenda, being able to cross-promote things within them proves really good. They're active, they're well attended, and a good thing to you to go to them. So on that flyer, point I want to highlight is that we tend to use discipline specific or make it relevant to the unit we're targeting it at. So that flyer was for our School of Natural and Environmental Sciences. Perhaps rather cynically, we use the same flyer with a different school name when we're doing it there. So when we say you're getting school specific messages, most of the messages are the same with a little bit of nuance around the side. So we're not literally doing different provision for each school. But what we do try to do is give top billing to colleagues from those disciplines, to include them in the events that we run, to provide that context, that local support, and to make sure the events are seen kind of as their events rather than ours, that it's a conversation and informal discussion with colleagues, that we're just there to provide some support around. And so, for example, things like this, the 3 people you see on there are well, 3 of last year's Open Research Award winners, kind of our champions, if you like, and they are we're very grateful that they're willing and able to go out and do things within their schools. There's one from each of our faculties. There are more beyond that, but those are the ones from this example that I want to show on the slide. Having those on board and giving those messages that we can add context to is a really good way of what we think of communicating with our researchers. And then I think Evangeline mentioned at the start, piggybacking on these kind of things, so strategic comms. Our open research, well, specifically training in open research through the UKRN programme, has just become what we're calling a top priority project for the university, one of 4 for the next year as part of our research culture initiative. Being part of that has made it get a lot of strategic communication, central marketing support and provision. It's just really bumped us up the priority list, I guess, in terms of visibility and impact it can have. So if you can and get involved in those things, it's great. That for us started off by being in a research culture festival or week that we ran, where we did a session on our open research culture, and that led on to that. So we're again lucky that that has happened, but it has made quite a big difference. Beyond that, we look to integrate with organisation development. So the events on library run or in a Microsoft form, they're in the management system for events that we have at the university. They get the kind of backing from that and support from that and the feedback, and it looks like it's a proper university event. We also have a regularly updated slide of forthcoming events and activities that we do. That sounds really trivial, but actually just being able to say to someone, please could you add that to the end of your slide deck if you're talking at a school meeting, faculty research committee, those kind of things where not necessarily our advocates, but PVC on the slide there are PVC for research culture. They're doing a lot of events, but those things get cascaded out. So if you have someone who's willing to just kind of drop those in, that again, we think is pretty effective. And as you'll have seen Diane do for this one, repeats and reminders, you can't beat nagging. So the two posts on there, the first one was, we're doing an event in a few weeks' time. This is what it's about. Had a few sign-ups. Then you remind them, go, oh, I forgot that was today. You immediately see the people you know are going to come register or let you know they're coming. And I know it's a really obvious thing to say, but just doing that really does pay dividends. So scheduling a few different points at which you're going to prompt people. And I feel a bit disingenuous saying this, but that was our first attempt at a flyer, and it was really village. And we just kind of threw it together. We didn't have any guidelines, templates, or approaches. And it's a crowded space when you're putting things like that up and getting some attention. We've tried to think about our brand a little bit. And one way we've gone is to play on open brands like reproducibility. They have an existing one, so we just adopted that and use it, and it makes it feel like it's part of a bigger initiative. And this also was mentioned. Don't underestimate the power of catering. Lots of these events, make it a nice drinks and nibbles or anything you can if you've got a small budget. That does tend to get people in the door, even if it's just a few biscuits. But then we try to use a brand kind of like this and like that. So it's very, very simple. It's a stock image with a bit of identity around it. But the idea is that people start to recognize it as being part of the open research work that we're doing. So that was me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. And yeah, thank you to all of our speakers. Wonderful to hear your experiences and see some of the kind of text that you're using, some of the kind of flyers that you're using. And it would be really great if there's an opportunity to share like templates or even just sharing examples like that. I think can be really helpful. So that people can kind of look and go, okay, I need to do an event. What do I need on it? And having those, sharing those, if you have anything that you want to share like that, you can send it to us and we will host it in a place. And when we send out this video, we can include links. We do have time now for some Q&A and also for some discussion. If people have any questions about this topic, about accessing open research enablers within their institutions, if they've had trouble with that, asking about if you have events coming up and you're wondering what's the best way to share, what's the best way to reach out to people. I think we've heard a lot of really great tips. One that really sprung to mind was Evangeline saying, once you have a contact, using their name in emails when you're reaching out to other people is actually a really powerful way of getting people engaged. Saying, so-and-so said I could reach out to you is more likely to get engagement than a cold call. I will stop talking. So if there are any questions, you can just turn on your camera or microphone and ask or put your hand up.
I have a question. I think one of the challenges that we have at Reading is that we're all super busy and there is so much information that we have to sift through. And so we have to make sure that the signal is sort of more than the noise, basically. And it's really hard. So I was wondering if anybody knew how to fix that. I think that as a no.
I think like I think that is a really big challenge. We have so much information out there, and it is hard to get that. I do find that targeting people individually helps, but that is much you know, it adds a lot of work. It's a bigger workload to kind of target individuals. But generally, we've found like if we send out an open call to everyone, people will think someone else will reply to it. But if we send it targeted and say, you know, dear Etienne, can you look at this for us? We're more likely to get a response. But it is, yeah, to make it break through just the general noise requires extra effort using that particular example. Joe.
I think it's important also, not just the quantity of information though, but the quality. And I think just the UKRN calendar is a good example of having lots of activities any given week. There's loads of stuff, but it's all good. You know, you can't go to all of it, but to make sure that the information is coming in good chunks. It looked like Steve's slides seemed like another good example. Lots of information, lots of stuff. Probably no one could do all of it. No one would want to, but anything they go to will be high quality. So that looks like a good practice for this space.
Can I just check, Joe, you're talking about the open research calendar?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'll share that in the chat. If people haven't already kind of interacted with the open research calendar, it is a UKRN supported initiative. And it is like anyone who is running open research events can post them for free on there, and they will circulate those. I think they're still using Twitter, but you can look at the calendar and just see what is going on, and there is a lot. They've got 1,100 events kind of listed over time. So yes, Steve.
Thanks, Will. Just on the link between local network leads and ORCAs, as I mentioned, we're just about to recruit for 1 or 2 new local network leads, and I'd like to put in something that said work with your ORCA on to. Is that an appropriate part of the local network lead role as people see it? And would you have any suggestions for how specific would be, what we might want to include?
I think within the context of your institution, it's important that you talk about that link and that work. So I do think it is appropriate. If you're sharing that as resources for a wider audience amongst local network leads, it's important to note that ORCAs are specific to the Open Research Programme, which is kind of 20, 25-ish institutions of 70 local network leads.
It's a good point. That might not have been relevant to everyone to ask here, but yeah, it was certainly just for our use at this point. I was just wondering, we use the role descriptor that you provide, the UKRN, and then modify it. As just, did people think that was an appropriate thing to do? To try and strengthen those links internally.
Yeah, I think that's important. And Evangeline, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know, speaking to Anna, not to blow my own trumpet, but I know that she has found it very, very helpful to have me there, just purely because, you know, I've got more time than her and I can focus on things and we catch up quite regularly. And I think if you have that opportunity, I know not everyone does, but like, I don't think you can oversay it, because it's not just like a responsibility for people to talk to their ORCAs, it's also very, very helpful for them, I think. So it's almost an advert rather than a requirement.
And I do think for local network leads who don't have a dedicated ORCA, there are definitely places within your institution, in the library, in research integrity kind of groups, in other kind of working groups, where there's administrative support that are interested in finding people and reaching out to people on these topics. It might just be a bit harder to find, but the library is certainly a good place to start usually if you've been having trouble kind of contacting people. And definitely what has been mentioned is piggybacking on things which are already happening makes your life a lot easier. They are looking for speakers, looking for people who are interested in being kind of open research experts, open research champions that local network leads can be. Yes, Etienne.
I think it is. I think it is very important to then also establish a link with the institution lead, because the institution lead will have an overview, an oversight of what is going on, and to grow that link. So as an institution lead, we have FTEs dedicated for that. So every week we're supposed to be doing something. And I use part of that time to meet with Anna and Evangeline and to keep this link going on. And so whenever there is something of interest to them, I will pass it back, and vice versa. And so I have included Evangeline and Anna when we wrote the new version of the Open Research Action Plan, for example. They were guests on the working group in that committee too. And so I think this is really important to have this synergy.
I also agree, but I will, again, just as a reminder, for all local network leads, about half of them have institutional leads. So if you're a local network lead without an institutional lead, it may feel like you're working harder on your own, and you probably are to get that institutional recognition. And I guess then it's finding links to other local network leads, because you can maybe get some help from institutional leads in other institutions if you play your cards right.
I mean, I remember I remember the situation where before we actually had an institution lead, and so I had identified some research dean who was interested in this, and I would make a point of meeting with him every month and to sort of shape this relationship. And so he was an informal institution lead before the time. So.
Thank you, Etienne. Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I was going to say something first, but first let me respond that yes, Etienne, I agree. We have an institutional lead, and maybe others don't, but that is quite useful to get to the university level committees, especially like open research groups at university management level, as a sort of local network. So in a good linking pin between, let's say, the bottom up and the top down in that sense. So that works quite well. And Will, you mentioned the sort of working regionally. That's something that we need to do a bit more of, to be honest. So James has now left from Solent. We've got Portsmouth, sort of the Solent area. I know that in Manchester, I think they're working together more closely, was my latest research intelligence. So I think that is also necessary. But that brings me to, my question for someone perhaps having a silver bullet. What I find the most challenging really is succession planning, or sort of long-term planning, because we've been around now since 2018, and of course COVID was in the way as well for everyone, but Enthusiastic was a relatively large group, etc. But people graduate, they leave, people think after 3 years I'm going to do something different because there are other roles to do. Keeping the energy up we've not really succeeded in doing that. So now we've got a much smaller group really than I would say just before COVID, for example. And that I find really challenging. I guess my experience with all organizations is that it's often a core group that does most of the work, but it would be great to have a silver bullet that sort of relates to succession planning and how you manage to plan for the future, and that it's not always the same people doing the most of that work, not because we don't want to, but because we want to grow the cause, right? Anyway, that's my silver bullet question for me.
That is a great question, and I just want to check before we kind of answer that with Kate, where you were commenting on the previous point. Or had your own question?
I was going to comment on how the approach I've taken at Bath to try and get change, and it has been more going in at the institutional level rather than grassroots. So I don't know if that follows or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it depends where you're kind of positioned in the institution as well. Like for some local network leads, it's going to be easier to access the senior staff than it is to access the grassroots. And for others, it's going to be easier at the grassroots. And we have a lot of flexibility, I guess, in terms of that position that you kind of take within your local network, how you organize it. We want you to feel free to access those as you can. Let's go back to Christian's question, which is quite a big one, and I'm conscious of the time. Is that fine? Are you happy with that, Kate? Or
Well,
did you have more to share?
I'd like to just make my point.
Yeah, go for it, go for it.
So
and then we'll answer
the
Christian's question.
Yeah, so I suppose then, I've been local network lead for a long time, and then before I was on maternity leave. And I think the way that, I think there's points about grassroots change and people moving on and it putting a lot of pressure on any career researchers, and then they've got other things to do in jobs and stuff. So the kind of strategic way I did it was I was asked to be part of the university academic ethics and integrity committee, and I was asked to be on that as in the role of the integrity part of it. And I said, yes, I'll do that. And then I used that position at the university level to really push for UKRN membership. And it took me several years, and it was a lot of kind of, working. But I sort of agree with Etienne's point that I think you can definitely find, and it's different for everybody, I think you can try and find the people you need to lobby at the higher orders within your university, and try and kind of keep pushing to kind of suggest that actually maybe either UKRN membership would be good, or other initiatives, but obviously we're about the UKRN here at the moment. And so, it took several papers going through the kind of university executive and so on. And then we were able to get Julie Barnett in as the associate. We kind of piggybacked an initiative that was going on anyway. And we got Julie Barnett as our institutional lead now, because she was going in as the associate pro-vice chancellor to support research culture across the university. So we were able to kind of strategically build in our membership of the UKRN for that. But that means that we've been able to forge a kind of a very kind of university level working group that does involve our data librarians, kind of members of staff that think about integrity across the board. We have some kind of new research integrity officers, different ethics. So I think ethics can be a way of getting in, because that's a very established network within your university. So maybe if you put yourself forward to kind of ethics committees or things like that, there might be scope within that to then start lobbying for kind of wider kind of ethical practices. And I know it's not completely the same, but integrity and ethics, by banding them together at Bath, it seems to have led to some institutional support for this cause, which has made things a lot easier, because now we have a big team of actual resource. So I just wanted to kind of, it took a lot of lobbying, but I think going in at that, going for those higher senior people that have influence at the university level, as well as doing grassroots things, can actually be more sustainable and means that you've built that legacy for future.
Thank you very much. Yeah, excellent point. Let's go back to and I think this is probably going to be the kind of final bit of time we have discussion for, since we're due to finish at 2. Any tips, tricks, strategies for progression planning?
I have to leave really quickly, so I'll just jump in. We use the Open Research Action Plan that usually spans several years, and the current action plans that it's just started now is now expanded to 5 years. And we've used that for the previous ones as well, where because we had an action plan that was signed off by the university and everybody knew about it and it's a big deal, it was easier to plan the succession, and also easier to budget time for people. So if we had a new role, we knew how many tasks or how many work packages there were, and so it was easier to. It's been easy to manage.
Joe.
So we're just getting started, so it really would be very silly for me to give any advice on sustaining an initiative that's been going for a long period of time. But I've got a couple of interesting clues anyway. One of them is how we've recruited a PhD student, or tried to recruit a PhD student to join the Train the Trainer program. And we spoke to the folks in Central Training, said, have we ever offered a contract to a PhD student before to do some training? They said no, but we could, especially if you've got a budget to pay for it. Sounds interesting. And our thinking about it was, well, of course, we expect that person presumably to finish their PhD and go to another institution, odds are. But if they participate in the Train the Trainer model, we will get some legacy from that here, right? So maybe there's a way to use that as at least a candidate principle, which is to go where the enthusiasm is. In this case, she is very enthusiastic about open research and, you know, learning about it because she's new to this. And don't expect to retain people, but look at what the activities are that generate value. And then about 1 million years ago, Will and I were meeting in Glasgow. That was like recently, and we were talking about how something that falls to UKRN, I think, is potentially creating a map of the value that UKRN brings. And so if we say, well, just as an example, when you train someone in the train-the-trainer program, you know, that value will stick around longer in the system than if you just train one person. That's one of the things that we can build as a principle. So I think that those are coherent concepts that would build in the succession into your plan, but look at the value generation separate from that.
Kate.
Yeah, and I think trying to get workloaded for this is really key to kind of keeping these things going. So part of the kind of move that we did at Bath was that my role as local network lead has, I think, this amount of hours a year allocated to doing it. And then obviously the institutional lead gets kind of a whack of time as well. But anywhere where you can really push the institution to kind of recognise that the work that you're doing is valuable and that it actually needs to have some workload allocated to it so that you're getting recognised and rewarded for it. And then, you know, when I finally do decide that I want to hand this over, then the next person, you know, it's a desirable job for somebody to do rather than it becoming, and once it's workloaded, it's there as a role, right? It's just like any other role, you can hand it over. Whereas I think until it's workloaded, it's a bit of a labour of love, which means that legacy can be a bit challenging.
Yeah, and a comment on that is that most of our local network leads have no workloading and are working as volunteers. But I do think that in recognising that people come and go from institutions, first of all, there's an opportunity for you to reuse things that you've done before. Don't be afraid. If you've got something that you've done a couple of years ago that was basically, why is this valuable? Do it again and renew, like get the new people that are coming in and give them their interest. It can feel, I guess, that you're not progressing because you're doing this loop, but you are dealing, like you're bringing in new people. Another thing to consider is that people that you enthuse in open research and UKRN in your institution who then leave are probably going to another institution. And so there's an opportunity for them to go and set up their own local network. So kind of telling people, you know, that they would be good in a local network lead role and encouraging them that while you're still excited being in that role is helpful, first of all, if you need to leave and have someone available to step in, but also for them to go off to other institutions and establish a network there. And with enough kind of breadth, then people coming in may have come from other institutions that have been involved in local networks, and you can kind of enthuse them as they change institution and kind of be open for them to join with a bit more experience and share that on. But it is certainly an issue, like precarity in the sector is a major issue. And for postdocs who usually are moving from one-year contract to one-year contract, institution to institution, it's hard to kind of maintain a continuity of a community. And that is a big sectoral problem that is hard to tackle, but it's not impossible. We have 1 minute left. So I do want to spend this time just to thank you all for joining us, for sharing your experiences and stories, and to encourage you, if you have any sample emails, any flyers, any documents that you've put together and used and had successful events, to share them with us if you're able to. Yes, Stephen, there is an onboarding guide for new LNLs that is being created. It should be out this month. I think it is in the review stage at the moment. Yes, hopefully by May, certainly it'll be available, and it will have, ideas, and we can link it to then things like OSF where we can share documents. It has just hit 2. Thank you very much for joining us. anyone wants to say last minute goodbyes, feel free.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Lovely to see you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye, Joe.